Hello everyone, welcome to Hope for Humanity YouTube channel. This channel is essentially going to be about finding environmental problems and political problems that I think need to be solved, as well as pretty just general things that I think need to be talked about, conversations that need to be had, or adding to conversations in ways that I don't think are necessarily being talked about. It's going to be a learning experience for me, so as I learn about these things, I want to share what I learn with you. So please comment down below anything that I leave out, or constructive criticisms you have, or ideas you have, because no matter who you are, as much as you feel like a nobody like myself, I'm a nobody really. I want to do what I can to help solve these problems, and I hope that you do too. You want to add your voice to the conversation, and anybody can come up with a great idea for how to solve these problems, or know information that maybe I don't know or other people don't know. So anyway, this is the first video on plastic, and it's a giant problem in on our planet today, and it's one that we certainly need to be thinking of solutions for. So enjoy. All right, so I want to start by recommending to you two books. The first one is How to Give Up Plastic by Will McCallum. He works for Greenpeace International, and this is kind of just a good overview on plastic and the impact it has. And then the other one is Zero Waste Home by Bea Johnson. She also has a website that you can go check out, but this book is great. I'll try to remember to link it down below, but essentially what it does is gives you all these different options you can use to eliminate as much, not just plastic, but waste in general from your home and live a much more environmentally friendly lifestyle. All right, so plastics. We use them in almost everything in our lives. You probably don't realize how much plastic you're actually using. They've been incredibly helpful to us over the years, probably one of the most helpful inventions we've ever made. But they're also, now we're starting to see the downsides of this wonderful thing that we use, which are pretty severe downsides. So what is plastic? According to sciencehistory.org, plastics are a group of materials, either synthetic or naturally occurring, that may be shaped when soft and then hardened to retain the given shape. Plastics are polymers. A polymer is the substance made of many repeating units. The word polymer comes from two Greek words, poly, meaning many, and meros, meaning parts or units. A polymer can be thought of as a chain in which each link is the mer or monomer. The chain is made up of joining or polymerizing at least 1,000 links together. All right. So I'll put some time links in the description, or at least I'll try to, so that you guys can skip ahead a little from the boring stuff if you want to. There's some more interesting stuff coming along. But next, we're going to talk about how plastic is made. So, how is plastic made? I recommend a video to you by GNP Animations for this, and I'll link it down below. They're generally made of crude oil or natural gas, but there are a few alternatives that we'll get to later on. Extraction is the first step. Oil or natural gas is drilled out of the ground. Refinement is next. Then they're taken to a refinement plant where they go through a distillation process, separating the oil into different parts, one of which is a substance called naphtha, which will then go through a cracking process. This is where the naphtha is heated, broken down into hydrocarbons, compressed, and then refined into ethene and various other substances. Ethene is polymerized by adding a catalyst, which turns the ethene into polyethylene. Antioxidants and stabilizers are added, and then is put into an extruder, which then creates polyethylene strings, which are ground up into pellets, which then are molded into plastic products. All right, types of plastic. There are two main types of plastic, which are categorized as thermoplastics. Most plastics we use are thermoplastics, and they soften when heated and harden again on cooling. And then there's thermosets, which never soften once they've been molded. Thermoplastics are things like PET, which is used in single-use water bottles. It stands for polyethylene terephthalate, which is I probably butchered that. PVC, you've probably seen it in hardware stores. Polypropylene is used in hot food containers, and thermosets example is polyurethane. Now we have the history of plastics. This is going to take a little bit longer. I'll put a timestamp so you can skip ahead in the description if you'd like. The history of plastics, we start with an article from Khan Academy, which is a pretty awesome website. You can check it out for yourself. First, we start with the Olmecs. They used rubber from rubber trees to make balls that they played games with a few thousand years ago. Then we go to sciencehistory.org for the rest of our information. The first synthetic polymer was invented in 1869 by John Wesley Hyatt, who was inspired by a New York firm's offer of $10,000 for anyone who could provide a substitute for ivory. The growing popularity of billiards had put a strain on the supply of natural ivory obtained through the slaughter of wild elephants. By treating cellulose derived from cotton fiber with camphor, Hyatt discovered a plastic that could be crafted into a variety of shapes and made to imitate natural substances like tortoiseshell, horn, linen, and ivory. Advertisements praised celluloid as the savior of the elephant and the tortoise. The creation of new material also helped free people from the social and economic constraints imposed by the scarcity of natural resources. Inexpensive celluloid made material wealth more widespread and obtainable. In 1907, Leo Baekeland invented Bakelite, the first fully synthetic plastic. Bakelite could be shaped or molded into almost anything, providing endless possibilities. World War II necessitated a great expansion of the plastics industry in the United States, as industrial might proved as important to victory as military success. Nylon, invented by Wallace Carothers in 1835 as a synthetic silk, was used during the war for parachutes, ropes, body armor, helmet liners, and more. Plexiglass provided an alternative to glass for aircraft windows. A Time magazine article noted that because of the war, plastics had been turned to new uses, and the adaptability of plastics demonstrated all over again. During World War II, plastic production in the United States increased by 300%. The surge in plastic production continued after the war ended. After experiencing the Great Depression and then World War II, Americans were ready to spend again. Much of what they bought was made of plastic. According to author Susan Frankel, in product after product, market after market, plastics challenged traditional materials and won, taking the place of steel in cars, paper and glass in packaging, and wood in furniture. The possibilities of plastics gave some observers an almost utopian vision of the future, with abundant material wealth, thanks to an inexpensive, safe, sanitary substance that could be shaped by humans to their own whim. Plastic debris in the ocean was first observed in the 1960s, a decade in which Americans became increasingly aware of environmental problems. Plastic reputation fell further in the 1970s and 80s as anxiety about waste increased. Plastic became a special target because while so many plastic products are disposable, plastic lasts forever in the environment. Well, not literally forever, but it does last a long time. We'll get into that. It was the plastic industry that offered recycling as a solution. In the 1980s, the plastic industry led an influential drive encouraging municipalities to collect and process recyclable materials as part of their waste management systems. The reputation of plastics has suffered further thanks to growing concern about the potential threat they pose to human health. All right, now what are plastics used for? I think you'll be surprised how much they're used for. I know I was. So we are producing over 300 million tons of plastic every year. A 2017 study in Science Advances that estimated 8.3 billion metric tons of plastic have been produced. It's used in clothing and blankets, polyester, for instance, which is in most of our clothes, including this. That's actually why I wore it, because you can see, unfortunately, it's very warm and fuzzy and comfortable, but it is also made of plastic. PET, a type of polyester used for things like fleece, nylon, acrylic, faux furs. Vegan shoes often have polyurethane in them. Waterproof clothing in general are made of plastic, which is upsetting. All plastic clothing items release microfibers when washed. Microfibers are a group of microplastics, a piece of plastic 5 millimeters or less, that are tiny fibers of plastic that make up something larger, such as a sweater. In general, the fuzzier it is, the worse it is for the environment because it releases more of these microfibers, which I know is a bummer. We'll also get into why the microfibers are harmful. Lots of plastic is used in bathroom items. All your containers for your toothpaste, shampoo, conditioner, body wash, deodorant, etc. These are all generally going to be made from plastic, as well as they often contain plastic, sometimes in the form of microbeads, which are tiny plastic particles formerly used as an abrasive in many personal care products, though there are a lot of companies that are trying to eliminate this as much as possible. Most of the packaging that you use for your food and drinks is going to be plastic, whether it's a bag of chips or something, that's going to be plastic, or a plastic water bottle. All of that's going to contain plastic. The medical industry has been absolutely revolutionized by plastic. Plastics have been used widely to create medical tools and devices like surgical gloves, syringes, insulin pens, IV tubes, catheters, inflatable splits, blood bags, new heart valves, and much more. That's all from mpo-mag.com. Eating utensils such as forks, knives, plates, and straws that you get that are disposable, often at barbecues and various parties. Those are all going to be made from plastic and can be quite harmful to the environment. Much of your transportation, from cars, planes, ships, trains, bikes, all that is going to have plastic on it somewhere. It's often used in construction, whether it's to keep the people safe, the construction workers safe, like in their hard hats, or in PVC pipes, vinyl siding, and lots more. We use it not just for storage of foods in the form of plastic bags, Tupperware, and wrap. We also use it for plastic bins to store pretty much anything else. We also use it to line landfills and nuclear waste containers so that the chemicals don't leak out. And as you can see, there's tons and tons of uses of plastic that have been very beneficial to us. But now we'll talk a little bit about the impact of what the plastic we use does. So one of the problems we run into with plastic is that it takes so long to decompose. According to thebalancesmb.com, plastic bags we use in our everyday lives take anywhere from 10 to 1,000 years to decompose. Plastic bottles can take 450 years or more. Disposable diapers take approximately 250 to 500 years to decompose. And most plastic is similar to this, where it takes a long time to decompose. And the way it breaks down is a problem as well. We'll get into that in a few minutes. And what do we do with this plastic while it's taking this long to decompose? Well, according to PBS.org, 12% has been incinerated, 9% is recycled, only 9%. The remainder, more than 3/4 of the plastic waste and more than half of all plastic ever made, ended up in landfills or natural environments. The team also found that 10% of plastic waste is recycled in the U.S. That's much lower than some other countries. So landfill versus incineration. Landfill, the plastic releases greenhouse gases in landfills, but it can be less than if it's burnt, which can release more chemicals into the air. Many landfills, especially older landfills in rural areas, are prone to producing leachate. Leachate is an often toxic liquid that results from the rain passing through a landfill and seeping into the groundwater. This is all according to sciencing.com, by the way. As rainwater passes through the landfill, it picks up organic and inorganic materials that contain elements harmful to humans. For example, heavy metals, pesticides, solvents combine with water that eventually makes its way into 40% of municipal drinking water and 90% of rural drinking water. Dangerous gases emitted from the decay contents of landfill increase air pollution. Studies on how close you live to a landfill show a marked likelihood of developing certain illnesses, including diabetes. Here's some problems with incineration. According again to the sciencing.com, burning waste emits toxic gases and particulates, which can settle in your lungs and in the air. It is not confined to the area where it is incinerated, as air currents can distribute the toxins this burning produces around the world. Both air emissions and incinerator ash include heavy metals and chemicals such as cadmium, mercury, sulfuric acid, hydrogen chloride, as well as deadly poison dioxin. So what about recycling? That's sold to be sort of the savior of this plastic waste. But it's not as good as you may think it is. We'll talk about that pretty extensively. So first of all, according to the Plastic Pollution Coalition, in the U.S., 93% of plastics are not recovered. They go straight to landfills. PET bottles that have a redemption value, cash value, fare a bit better, yet 62% are not recovered, according to EPA data. A lot of recycling is also downcycled, which is when you take something recyclable, make it a lower quality or functionality than the original material, and this often prevents it from being recycled again. One of the worst problems we have with recycling, this is true not just of recycling, also regular trash as well, but mostly recycling, unfortunately, is the fact that we ship it overseas, both in Europe and in the United States. So it's often shipped to third world countries, these countries that don't have the means of actually recycling them. We ship it to them, and people kind of sift through it, trying to make a few bucks off of it. But these are incredibly poor countries that don't have the infrastructure, and the people are incredibly poor. unfortunately, then they suffer from it considerably. So we're going to need to build the infrastructure in the United States in order to make recycling as efficient as it should be. So quoting from the Plastic Pollution Coalition, the U.S. Census Bureau recently published complete 2018 export data for shipments of plastic waste, officially called waste, pairing, and scrap, generated in the U.S. and sent to other countries. As shown, 78% of the 2018 U.S. plastic waste exports were sent to countries with waste mismanagement rates greater than 5%. That means about 157,000 large shipping containers, or 429 per day, of U.S. plastic waste were sent in 2018 to countries that are now known to be overwhelmed with plastic waste and major sources of plastic pollution to the ocean. The actual amount of U.S. plastic waste that ends in countries with poor waste management may be even higher than 78%, since countries like Canada and South Korea may re-export U.S. plastic waste as well. This data indicates that the U.S. continued to export about as much plastic waste to countries with poor waste management as we recycle domestically. Some countries are trying to put an end to this, though. Again, from the Plastic Pollution Coalition, U.S. plastic waste exports have declined by nearly half between 2015 and 2018. The primary reason for the decline is China's strict scrap import policies, which have reduced imports of plastic waste to the U.S. with a reduction of 96% since its peak in 2012. The decline is positive news for the oceans, rivers, ecosystems, and people, and the people that have been receiving end of this. Less plastic waste was sent to the places that do not have secure waste management systems, such that all the plastic waste will be responsibly recycled into new plastic products. Unfortunately, now we have found other countries to send these to, which also do not have the infrastructure to take it in. This is quoting from an article on Mother Jones. U.S. recyclers soon found new buyers and destinations for American garbage, particularly their plastic waste. Starting in late 2017 and escalating through 2018, Malaysia and other nations in the Southeast Asia were flooded with recyclable plastics from the U.S. The region's imports from other developed nations like the UK, Germany, Japan, and Australia also skyrocketed. The fire hose of trash caught these recipient countries by surprise. None had recycling facilities that remotely compared with China's, noted Hernandez. In the first half of 2018, imports of plastic trash doubled in Vietnam and increased in Thailand by a staggering 1,370% compared with the same period of the previous year, according to an October report in the Financial Times. At one point last June, Thailand reportedly had 30,000 containers full of imported plastic waste sitting in its ports because of the lack of capacity and issues with import permits. Vietnam reported some 9,000 idle containers of plastic waste, according to Resource Recycling. From January to November 2018, Malaysia imported about 435 million pounds of plastic scrap from the U.S. alone. According to the data provided by Resource Recycling, over the same period in 2017, U.S. exporters sent just over 220 million pounds of scrap plastic to Malaysia. Unfortunately, this trash is also causing health problems in these areas. According to the World Economic Forum, it is these poor countries that are shouldering much of the burden of our global waste habit. Between 400,000 and 1 million people die each year in developing countries because of diseases caused by mismanaged waste. Estimated Poverty Charity Cheer Fund. That's who did the estimates. Now, it can still be worth recycling, so don't give it up entirely, but we do need to build more recycling centers here in the U.S., Europe, and all over the world, because we can't keep sending our recycled and trashed material to third world countries that particularly don't have the infrastructure to deal with it. Now let's move on to the impact that plastic is having on our oceans. So 90% of plastic pollution that goes into our oceans comes from just 10 rivers, 8 of which are in Asia and 2 of which are in Africa. Now, I know you may be thinking, oh, good, if I live in the Americas or in Europe, that we're safe, we're doing our recycling, we're doing good. It's not our stuff. Remember what I just said about our recycling and our waste getting shipped to third world countries or countries that don't have the infrastructure to deal with it. Well, these are the countries that it goes to and then floats down the rivers into the ocean. So it is a lot of our waste. Well, how much plastic is there actually in the ocean? So if we could look at ocean.si.edu, A 2014 study estimates that there are 5.25 trillion particles, or 244,000 metric tons of plastic floating in the ocean. That's just floating. A 2017 study found that 79,000 metric tons of plastic are floating in the Great Pacific Garbage Patch alone. Another 2017 study explored how much plastic falls to the ocean floor and estimates that 8.5 million metric tons settle in the ocean bottom per year. So let's talk a little bit more about these patches in the ocean, like the Great Pacific Garbage Patch. There's 5 gyres to be exact: the North Atlantic, the South Atlantic, the North Pacific, South Pacific, and Indian Ocean gyres. They have a significant impact on the ocean. In the last 5 years, researchers have discovered 2 more areas where the soup of concentrated marine debris collect, one in the South Pacific Ocean and the other in the North Atlantic. That's in addition to the Great Pacific Garbage Patch, which is the biggest. As I mentioned before, some plastic floats and some plastic sinks. According to www.nature.com, in the article, they're discussing a study done to see if the effect on microplastics on deep sea organisms, see how it affects them. Microfibers inside deep sea organisms were found from 334 to 1,783 meters in depth in the equatorial mid-Atlantic, 954 to 1,062 meters in the southwest Indian Ocean. Previous studies have found microfibers in sediments down 2,000 meters in the subpolar North Atlantic, 2,200 meters in the northeast Atlantic, 3,500 meters in the Mediterranean, and 5,768 meters down in the West Pacific. Wow. Now, I thought we'd take a brief detour here to discuss a little bit more about microfibers. So this is according to beachopedia.org, and this is going to be a little long, so just stay with me here. In 2016, a joint UC Santa Barbara and Patagonia study found that 250,000 microfibers can be shed from a single fleece jacket after just one wash. In the state of California alone, it is estimated that billions of microfibers escape wastewater treatment plants every day. It's in your tap water. In 2017, Dr. Sam Mason worked with Orb Media to conduct an international study on microplastics in tap water. A total of 159 water samples collected and analyzed from 5 continents, with 83% of the samples containing microplastics, or those microplastics, 99.7% were microfibers. In the United States, 94% of tap water samples contained plastics. In bottled water, in 2017, Dr. Mason and Orb Media conducted a similar study, but focused solely on microplastics in bottled water. From all over the world, a total of 259 bottles from 11 brands were purchased from 19 locations in 9 countries, with 93% of bottled water samples containing microplastics. An average of 325 microplastic particles were found per liter of bottled water, ranging from 0 to 10,000 particles per liter. Nestle bottled water contained the highest amount of plastic particles. In the air, in 2014, a study in France tested indoor and outdoor air for plastic microfibers. Indoors, researchers found an average of 3 to 15 microfibers per cubic meter of air, while outside they found an average of 0.2 to 0.8 microfibers per cubic meter of air. Alarmingly, researchers found evidence of atmospheric deposition with the average of 29 to 280 plastic particles per square meter per day in 2019. Another study in France confirmed that the potential for an atmospheric deposition of microplastics, documenting the deposition of 365 microplastics per square meter per day in a remote area in French Pyrenees Mountains. Microplastics included particles, fibers, and films. It's in your salt as well. In 2018, Incheon National University and Greenpeace East Asia published a study that tested commercial food-grade salt for the presence of microplastics. Of 39 salt brands tested from 16 countries on 6 continents, the amount of microplastics found ranged from 0 to 1,674 plastic particles per kilogram sea salt, with one outlier of 13,629 plastic particles per kilogram 0 to 148 plastic particles per kilogram rock salt, and 24 to 462 microplastics per kilogram lake salt. It's also in your honey. In 2013, two chemists tested 19 honey samples from 5 countries, Germany, France, Italy, Spain, and Mexico, for the presence of non-pollen particles, and found that 100% of samples contained microplastics. Seafoods can be some of the worst because of all the plastic that's in the ocean. So a 2015 study found that 1 in 3 shellfish and 1 in 4 finfish sampled at a California fish market contained microfibers, and these fish were headed straight for the dinner table. It is estimated that people could be unknowingly ingesting 11,000 microfibers each year from shellfish consumption and 178 microfibers from eating a single mussel. A 2019 study tested deep sea larvaceans and pelagic red crabs and found microplastics in every animal specimen surveyed. It's in your beer as well. In 2014, 2 chemists tested 24 German beer brands for plastic particles with 100% of samples containing microplastics. Microplastics identified included a range of fibers, particles, and granules. Sadly, it's not just in our oceans, it's in the lakes as well. For instance, the Great Lakes, according to greatlakes.org, more than 22 million pounds of plastic pollution end up in the Great Lakes every year, according to the Rochester Institute of Technology. That's an article from greatlakes.org. And also, the Great Lakes provide drinking water for 40 million people, according to their website. So we're going to go into a little bit more of the health downsides of various creatures on the earth, human and other creatures. So before we get started in this section, I should say that one of the best things you can do to reduce the amount of plastic in the ocean is actually stop eating fish, because fishermen are some of the worst polluters of plastic into the ocean. 46% of the overall mass of the Great Pacific Garbage Patch is comprised just of fishing nets alone. So that's something to keep in mind. So here's an interesting PDF I'll link down below from at marinedebris.noaa.gov, and this really goes into some of the horrors that fishing nets and other bits of plastic can do to animals. So starting with pinnipeds or seals, they often get caught in fishing gear. So pinnipeds were generally observed to be entangled around the head and appendages in net fragments, monofilament line, packing straps, rope, and rubber products. While entanglement can affect all age classes, juveniles and subadults appeared to be the most susceptible. Whales and dolphins also get wrapped in fishing gear, as well as we're finding plastic in their stomachs, unfortunately. In 2017, a large sperm whale was found beached with 64 pounds of trash in its digestive tract. We also are finding seabirds wrapped in various bits of plastic bags and things, as well as ingesting a lot of it. So worldwide, it is estimated that at least 67 species of seabirds are entangled in or ingest plastic. Majority of entanglements involved fishing gear, such as monofilament line and hooks, but 8.3% of the entanglements were from non-fishery related items. Common murres and western gulls from the most common are the most common species to be found entangled. Sea turtles are also struggling with plastic. The behavior of sea turtles makes them particularly vulnerable to entanglement. For example, young sea turtles tend to seek shelter under floating objects to avoid predation. These areas are also a source of food, as small marine animals also congregate here. Unfortunately, sea turtles tend to align themselves with oceanic fronts, convergences, rip and drift lines where marine debris can often occur. As such, sea turtles are susceptible to entanglement in all forms of marine debris that can form loops and openings that could catch on to the appendages of sea turtles. Six-pack can holders, plastic bags, and fishing nets are particularly bad. Fish offer another problem with plastics. Microplastics, including microfibers, are easily ingested by marine life, which may end up on our dinner plates. In a study from 1998 to 2015, small-toothed sawfish were found entangled in PVC pipe, monofilament line, elastic bands, and netting in Florida. The long snout with exposed teeth of these species could make it vulnerable to any debris that could easily attach to its teeth. Talking a little bit more about microplastics and microfibers, according to beachopedia.org, not only does the ingestion of these microfibers reduce the amount of nutrition obtained from feeding, it also poses an additional risk of harmful bacteria and toxic exposure. Of all chemicals known to be persistent in our environment, bioaccumulative in the food chain, and toxic to life, also known as PBTs, 78% are found in or on microfibers. As a result, the concentrations of PBTs and microfibers are orders of magnitude greater than the concentrations of PBTs otherwise found in seawater. Examples of observed PBTs include pesticides like DDT, plastic additives like brominate, flame retardants. Microfiber can actually enter and remain in the bloodstream and tissues of the food we eat. Studies have identified a reduction in oyster reproduction rates and impacts to the sexual determination of baby sea turtles from the slowed warming rates of sandy sediment containing microfibers, among other effects. Microplastics can actually go through the brain. As plastic breaks down, it breaks into smaller and smaller little chunks, and we eventually get microplastics. And as I say, these can actually go through the brain of some creatures. According to ncbi.nlm.nih.gov, a Lund University researchers studied nanoplastics may be transported through different organisms in the aquatic ecosystem, i.e., via algae and animal plankton to larger fish. Tiny plastic particles in the water are eaten by animal plankton, which in turn are eaten by fish. According to Sederval, the study includes several interesting results on how plastic of different sizes affects aquatic organisms. Most importantly, it provides evidence that nanoplastic particles can indeed cross the brain-blood barrier in fish and thus accumulate inside fish's brain tissue. In addition, the researchers involved in the present study have demonstrated the occurrence of behavioral disorders in fish that are affected by nanoplastics. They eat slower and explore their surroundings less. The researchers believe that these behavioral changes may be linked to brain damage caused by the presence of nanoplastics in the brain. Another result of the study is that animal plankton die when exposed to nano-sized plastic particles, while larger plastic particles do not affect them. Overall, these different effects of nanoplastics may have an effect on the ecosystem as a whole. It is important to study how plastics affect ecosystems and that nanoplastic particles like that have a more dangerous impact on the aquatic ecosystems than larger species of or larger pieces of plastic. Now we'll look at the effect of plastics on reefs. According to oceans.si.edu, one study found that 89% of reefs containing plastic showed signs of diseases, while only 4% of plastic-free reefs were diseased. Science.sciencemag.org contended disease likelihood increases 20-fold once a coral has been draped in plastic. Plastic debris stresses coral through light deprivation, toxin release, and anoxia, given pathogens a foothold for invasion. Plastic waste can promote microbial colonization by pathogens implicated in outbreaks of diseases in the ocean. We assess the influence of plastic waste on disease risk in 124,000 reef-building corals from 159 reefs in the Asia-Pacific region. The likelihood of disease increased from 4% to 89% when corals are in contact with plastic. Structurally complex corals are 8 times more likely to be affected by plastic, suggesting that microhabitats for reef-associated organisms and valuable fisheries will be disproportionately affected. Plastic levels on coral reefs correspond to estimates of terrestrial mismanaged plastic waste entering the ocean. We estimate that 11.1 billion plastic items are entangled on coral reefs across the Asian Pacific and project this number to increase 40% by 2025. Plastic waste management is critical for reducing diseases that threaten ecosystem health and human livelihood. BPA can also leak from water bottles. According to www.cdc.gov, human health effects from BPA at low environmental exposures are unknown. BPA has been shown to affect the reproductive systems of laboratory animals. More research is needed to understand the human effects of exposure to BPA. It's a fairly large concern, it seems, as a lot of water bottles are saying BPA free, but we don't know exactly the results. There have been illegal sites cropping up in Malaysia after some bans were put in place from American and European plastic being sent over. So essentially, some people have been allowing trash to be stored in their places totally illegally against the country and they've been burning it as a means of making some money, but it's causing health problems. Here's some health problems you can have from burning plastic. This is according to the World Economic Forum. It can increase the risk of heart disease, aggravated respiratory ailments such as asthma and emphysema, and cause rashes and nausea. Headaches, damage in nervous system, kidney or liver, and the reproductive and development system. The burning of polystyrene polymers such as foam cups, meat trays, egg containers, yogurt, and deli containers release styrene. Styrene gas can readily be absorbed through the skin and lungs. The most dangerous emissions can be caused by burning plastics containing organochlor-based substances like PVC. I'm not sure if I said that word right. When such plastics are burned, harmful quantities of dioxins, a group of high toxic chemicals, are emitted. Dioxins are the most toxic to the human organisms. They are carcinogenic and a hormone disruptor, and they accumulate in our body fat, and thus mothers give it directly to the babies via the placenta. Dioxins also settle on crops and in our waterways when they eventually wind up in our food, accumulate in our bodies, and are passed on to our children. Soils also get affected by plastics. Let's see. According to ncbi.lm.nih.gov, the present results highlighted the potential of microplastics to alter fundamental properties of the soil, biophysical environment, with consequences for functional changes in soils. Our findings might have far-reaching consequences for numerous terrestrial ecosystem processes. The current study constitutes the first explorative data-driven analysis of microplastic impacts on soil function. According to ScienceDaily.com, there's an article that talks about the worry that increased amounts of plastic and sludge from sewage treatment plants that get turned into fertilizer will affect the soil as well. There needs to be more studies done on this, but it's interesting. All right, now let's talk about some interesting solutions that are coming into the world of plastics. I'll be citing some TED Talks and things like that. I'll try to have them all linked below. So first of all, there's this TED Talk called "The Surprising Solution to Ocean Plastic." In it, the speaker talks about how we need to turn off the tap before we ever clean up the mess. You see some beach cleanup programs happening. Some are actual beach cleanup, and some are ocean cleanup, I should say. Now, of course, this is necessary to get the plastic off the beaches and out of the ocean. But if we don't stop the production of plastic, then it'll just keep filling up because the amount we produce is so substantial that it'll just be one non-stop process of trying to clean it up. And then, of course, after you clean it up, you put it in a landfill or do something with it, it'll often end up in the ocean again. So that is not a solution to keep producing it. We must turn off the tap before we can really solve this problem. There are, however, a few projects, the Ocean Cleanup Project and the N4Ocean, which you've probably seen some sort of advertisements for. These are trying to solve the problem of the ocean cleanup, but again, we will have to stop the production of plastic if we ever want to really solve this problem. Waxworms can be an interesting solution to plastic, or an interesting idea at least. There's some argument about their effectiveness, but essentially the idea is that waxworms can eat certain types of plastics, like styrofoam potentially. I'll link an article about it. It's kind of early in the findings, and it seems to not be as effective as originally thought. But I will, as I say, link it below. Bioplastics are another alternative that seems to be becoming more popular, and I will be citing a study here, and it's going to take a few minutes to talk about, so just buckle in here. So this is according to blogs.ie.columbia.edu. A 2010 study from the University of Pittsburgh. The study compared 7 traditional plastics, 4 bioplastics, and 1 made from both fossil fuel and renewable sources. The researchers determined that bioplastic production resulted in greater amount of pollutants due to the fertilizers and pesticides used in growing the crops, and the chemical processing needed to turn organic material into plastic. The bioplastics also contributed more to ozone depletion than the traditional plastics and required extensive land use, B, PET, the hybrid plastic, was found to have the highest potential for toxic effects on the ecosystem and the most carcinogens, and scored the worst in the life cycle analysis because it combined the negative impacts of both agriculture and chemical processing. Bioplastics do produce significantly fewer greenhouse gases emissions than traditional plastics over their lifetime. There is no net increase in carbon dioxide when they break down because the plants in bioplastics are made from absorbed that the bioplastics are made from absorbed the same amount of carbon dioxide as they grew. A 2017 study determined that switching from traditional plastic to corn-based PLA would cut U.S. greenhouse gas emissions by 25%. That study also concluded that traditional plastics were produced using renewable energy sources. Greenhouse gas emissions could be reduced 50 to 75%. However, bioplastics that might in the future be produced with renewable energy showed the most promise for sustainably reducing greenhouse gas emissions. While biodegradability of bioplastics is an advantage, most need high-temperature industrial composting facilities to break down, and very few cities have the infrastructure needed to deal with them. As a result, bioplastics often end up in landfills where deprived of oxygen, they may release methane, a greenhouse gas 23 times more potent than carbon dioxide. I'm also going to link a video on some new plastics from the Center for Sustainable Polymers that you can check out. Just a brief summary of it. They make a foam out of bacteria and sugar that can be used in pillows and other things that require foam. It can be broken down into its base ingredients and then made again. It's still fairly expensive, but does provide some hope for the future. We do need to be wary that companies make billions off of petroleum-based plastics, and they're going to put up quite a fight against alternatives to this. So it'll be hard for these alternatives to really enter the market on a large scale, but I will link the video for you. There's some research being done on plastic-eating bacteria. It's called Ideonella cicanensis, or something like that. I tried at least. This is the bacteria that eats plastic. It is evolved specifically for this process. In 2016, scientists from Japan tested different bacteria from a bottle recycling plant and found that this bacteria could digest the plastic used to make single-use drinks, bottles, polyethylene, or PET. It works by secreting an enzyme known as PETase. This splits certain chemical bonds in PET, leaving smaller molecules that the bacteria can absorb, using the carbon in them as a food source. The improvements to the PETase active were not dramatic, and we are nowhere near a solution to our plastic crisis, but this research helps us understand how this promising enzyme breaks down PET and hints at how we could make it work faster by manipulating its active parts. There's one worry though. While any modified bacteria used in bioreactors are likely to be highly controlled, the fact that it is evolved to degrade and consume plastic in the first place suggests this material we rely on so heavily may not be durable as we thought. If more bacteria began eating plastic in the wild, then products and structures designed to last many years could come under threat. The plastics industry would face the serious challenge of preventing its products becoming contaminated with hungry microorganisms. Kind of interesting. That's by physics.org/news. Also on this topic, there's a TED Talk called "These Bacteria Eat Plastic," where this woman Morgan Vague made some bacteria that also does a similar thing. So you can check out her TED Talk. We'll try and remember to link it below. I also found an interesting article on hemp-made products. Back in the day, Henry Ford, the tremendous anti-Semite, when he was designing cars, obviously, he made a hemp car. So here's an article by thefinancialexpress.com. In 1941, after 12 years of arduous research, Henry Ford showcased his ultimate product with the potential to have changed the environment. A car made entirely out of hemp and could run off hemp fuel as well as vegetable oil. Unfortunately, the powers that be at the time, including the massively powerful and wealthy gasoline industry that lobbied hard to keep alcohol taxes high and drop the price of gasoline. This even coincided with the prohibition of alcohol and hemp in the 1920s. I'll link the article below. Some of it's speculation. It's kind of interesting to read, though. I think you'll find it's worth your time. There's an interesting video on YouTube called Fungus, the Plastic of the Future, which I recommend to you. The video basically just shows some interesting work being done with mycelium and 3D printing, so the potentials that mycelium and wood and things have for 3D printing, making things like chairs and stuff. So I will try and link that below for you, as well as an article about the research. Expanding on that last idea, there's a TED Talk called Are Mushrooms the New Plastic? And this is one of the most interesting solutions I was able to find. I'll link the TED Talk below, as well as some company. So here's what I wrote about it. Mysobond is a mycelium material that can be used as a polymer like plastic, and it is low energy, heat, water, and fire resistant. It can be shaped however you like and is compostable. The owner claims that about 25% of our landfills is expanded polystyrene, which is like styrofoam. But his replacement, this Mysobond, has local open feedstocks, 100% biological yield. It biodegrades when you add it to soil as well. I'm really excited about this idea, and it seems like fungus may be a large part of our future and some sort of plastic replacement. There's still a lot of research that needs to be done, though. Here's a video called The Plastic Pollution Problem Hiding in Plain Sight. This is on YouTube. It discusses briefly that Norway has these plastic bottle deposits. And so according to The Guardian, this scheme has allowed Norway to receive recycled 97% of all its plastic bottles. Of course, Norway's model is based on a loan scheme, which means that when the consumer buys a plastic bottle, they are charged a small additional fee equivalent to about 13 to 30 US cents. This fee can be redeemed in a number of ways. Consumers can either take it to a reverse vending machine, which returns the money after scanning the barcode of the deposited bottle, or they can take it to a various return at small shops, gas stations, and things like that for cash or store credit, which is interesting. I'll link an article below as well. Another interesting TED Talk I came across was by Mike Biddle, and it's called We Can Recycle Plastic. He basically started a recycling company that works together with metal recyclers to mix out plastics and go through a multi-step process of more efficiently sorting them out into the different types of plastic and then recycling them into a new plastic. Another TED Talk I came across was called A Radical Plan to End Plastic Waste by Andrew Forrest. He is an Australian billionaire known mostly for his work in metal and cattle industries. He wants to create an economy of rag pickers, who are people that go through plastic and things and collect potentially valuable materials. And get the price of recycling slightly lower than the price of making new, so that there's a market for this recycled material better than there is now. And then a small tax could be added to each piece of plastic that would be partly paid by the consumer and partly by the producer. And this fund would be used for the reg pickers as well, for the people working to get this recycled plastic. And it certainly could be exploited by the worst form of capitalist, because they're so poor and easily exploitable. But it is an interesting idea. Perhaps it could make a significant difference. One TED Talk that might be particularly interesting for the ladies watching, but as well for the men, good to know, is Plastic Pollution, Our Toilets and Us by Natalie Fee. Basically, she says, don't flush tampons, plastic wrapper, pads, panty liners, face wipes, Q-tips, things like that. Anything with plastic you can't flush down the toilet. Usually the sifting systems are not very good to sort out these things, and they could end up in the ocean potentially. And she's, interesting enough, she started a campaign to bombard women's product companies on their social media pages, and so to ask them to switch to non-plastic alternatives for the companies, and many of them did it. So it's worth watching. I'll link the video below. I found this interesting, another TED Talk online by Angelina Aurora. It's what creating a toxin-free plastic taught me about problem solving. She created a plastic from prawn shells, which is kind of interesting. It's obviously not vegan, but it's an interesting idea. She also created found that this algae could help be used to clean up oil spills. And she was just a young lady. I don't know how old she is now, but I think she was like 17 or something at the time of this. So it's interesting seeing young people get involved, coming up with solutions. She said that according to her, she extracted a carbohydrate called chitin found in a shell and chemically converted it into chitosan. Then she combined it with fibroin found in a spider web for consistency. What she invented was a plastic that decomposed 1.5 million times faster than conventional plastic. She's now trying to use this material in for medical uses, like in wound dressing. So you should check it out. I'll link an article as well as her TED Talk down below. Another interesting TED Talk for you to check out is called How India's Local Recyclers Could Solve Plastic Pollution. India has a surprisingly high recycling rate. It says it's about 60% of plastic material is recycled compared to 20% at the world average. India has informal recyclers that he believes will be, that the author of the video believes that it will be a integral part of the plastic solution as they help recycle, sort of like the reg pickers we talked about earlier. Essentially what we need to do is to help them receive money in a similar solution to the Andrew Forrest video for their contribution of picking up this plastic and reusing it, and make sure that the recycled is cheaper than the new plastic. Getting into some other solutions here, one idea is unboxed markets are becoming more popular. There's one in Seattle. You can check out at unboxedmarket.com. Essentially what it is it's a place where you bring your own, let's say, glass container. You weigh it to see what the weight is without any food in it. Then you fill it with whatever food you're getting, and then you weigh it again and you subtract the difference. This allows you to not have to purchase plastic packaging, and you can use these glass containers over and over again, and they store and keep your food sealed. So if you want to get nuts or coffee beans or whatever, you can do this. And you probably will have places in your town that you can do this. Check with store managers and things, and often they'll be willing to work with you. Large corporations are beginning to come up with solutions, or at least attempting to. One of them is Coca-Cola, who, of course, has been nominated 2 years in a row, I believe, as the worst global plastic polluter in the world. But they are trying to come up with some changes. One of them is they have this idea where they take, it's a three-step program, make packaging 100% recyclable globally by 2025, and use at least 50% recycled material in packing by 2030. Collect and recycle a bottle or can for each one they sell by 2030. And 3, work together to support healthy debris-free environment. So we'll see if they actually hold true to this. Oftentimes these corporations are just doing it in order to, appease the people purchasing their products. Though sometimes that gets them to do it. Sometimes it'll just get them to make it look like they're doing it. So I guess pay attention. There's been a few companies trying to do plastic roads even in the United States I've seen, but also in India and other places. There is some problems with this though. Sometimes it's actually the companies have trouble getting the plastic the way they want it for the road, and they end up making plastic anyway, so you totally defeat the purpose. But if you actually do it as intended, then it could be an interesting solution perhaps. So now let's go into the next section, which will be talking about some alternatives you can use yourself. Before we go into that, though, let's talk briefly about the 5 R's. This is written about in the book, The Zero Waste Home. You may also hear it as 3 R's occasionally, but anyway, they are refuse, reduce, reuse, recycle, and rot. Refuse is things like plastic straws, plastic water bottles, freebies, party favors, junk mail, and things like that. Just single-use plastics that you don't need, that aren't necessary, that you can have alternatives for. Just refuse flat out, so you don't need to add to the problem. The second step is reduce, which reduce what you need and cannot refuse by evaluating past consumption and see what generally goes to waste or doesn't get used like you thought it would, and this would help you form better shopping habits as well. These shopping habits will make you more cognizant of your single-use plastic purchases and where you can make changes to reduce this. And you also find items around the house that aren't getting the amount of use that you thought they might, and these you can donate to people that will get a fair amount of use out of them. In general, you should reduce your consumption overall to just things that are needs or things that really add value to your life. For things that meet this criteria, try to find the most eco-friendly alternative or purchase them from thrift or used shops so you aren't adding more plastic than is already created. Next comes reuse. Try to switch to items that can be used over and over again as opposed to single-use items, particularly if you can find a more eco-friendly alternative. Finding ways to get the most out of the plastic items you own can make a big difference. For instance, if you already have a plastic grocery bags, you can use them as an alternative to bubble wrap in your shipping in your packages you ship out. That's an idea I got from Zero Waste Home as well. Next up, we have recycling. As we've talked about this before, it isn't a perfect solution. We need the infrastructure, but do try and recycle when you can, as the stuff that does get recycled is better than just throwing it in the trash. Lastly, we have rot, which is essentially composting. Compost as much as you can. This will allow you to save in your trash space, saving trash bags, or even, as we'll get to later, potentially not use trash bags. So first on our list of alternatives, we have plastic bag alternatives. This is kind of a damned if you do, damned if you don't situation, because cotton bags use a lot more fossil fuels to make, a considerable amount more. Now the plastic bags use less fossil fuels to make, but do more damage to the environment certainly afterwards than the plastic or the cotton bag does. So you can of course use a cotton bag if that's your preference to use over and over again. Paper bags are an option. Unfortunately, they aren't flexible at all and break very easily, so I find them kind of frustrating, and they can often be kind of useless if you have heavy goods. Other options are places like Costco offer these just boxes that you take that are boxes that the food originally got shipped in, and that's a good option in my opinion. You can also find mesh bags and things like that, or the plastic jars, things like that, or excuse me, not plastic, but glass jars and things like that. It just depends on the food. So right now we don't have a perfect solution. Just use your cotton bags if you can, and hopefully boxes at places like Costco, and hopefully other stores will start doing that as well. As far as food wrap alternatives go, there's a few options. Really the options I've found were beeswax or cotton, and often the cotton ones have wax on them as well. Obviously not a vegan option, but I think as time goes on we'll get more options and better options as far as cotton food wrap goes. For food containers, there's a few options. I'll try to link everything I'm talking about down below as much as I can. Metal and glass are going to be your best options because they can be used over and over again, as well as metal and glass are much more recyclable than plastic. So you can put spices in spice jars, herbs in glass water once you get home. Use small sized jars for wet products such as peanut butters. Find a store that lets you make it fresh and bring your own pre-weighed container, as we talked about before. Pickled foods and things like that. You can obviously use glass jars. Tupperware can be an option if you find it used at a thrift stop, because you're not adding more plastic to the world, though it still will have the issues once it's in the landfill or wherever it goes. But at least you're not creating more plastic. Make sure it's in good shape though, because you can be leaching toxins and things like that. That can be quite harmful. Try to buy local as much as you can as well. This will give you more options for packaging, and usually they'll be a bit more okay with you bringing your own containers and things like that. It can be a bit more expensive, but it's worth it if you can afford it. Alternatives to bars of soap. So here's an interesting study. According to the U.S. Food and Drug Administration, there isn't enough science to show that over-the-counter OTC antibacterial soaps are better at preventing illness than washing with plain soap and water. To date, the benefits of using antibacterial hand soap haven't been proven. In addition, the wide use of these products over a long time has raised the question of potential negative effects on health even. That's according to the FDA, and I'll link that below. So for soaps locally, we have a great company called Mountain Madness Soap, which I'll link below as well. And they offer soaps, deodorants, shampoos, and things that I'll be talking about in a minute. And they're like I say, local, and they have tons of different scents, and they're bars of soap, so you don't have to purchase a bottle that's going to have a plastic container. Toothbrush alternatives are generally bamboo toothbrushes, or what people go with. There's also wood, but bamboo is generally what people choose. And they have plant-based options as well as some non-vegan options, I believe. I'll link some bamboo toothbrushes down below for you. For deodorants, try to find some that aren't in the plastic containers. You can find them in cardboard sometimes from a few different companies. I'll try to link some. And sometimes you can find places like Mountain Madness Soap that we have here has deodorants in jars that you can try. It's pretty good. And then once you're done with the jar, you can hopefully check with your local store. You may find that you have one yourself. You can bring back this jar and maybe have it refilled at this local company if you have one yourself. One thing I almost forgot to mention with the deodorants is that you can often make your own as well. And so I'll link a recipe for that if you want to give it a try. There's some eco-friendly toilet paper options as well. Some are bamboo, some are not. And so sometimes you can find clubs that will give you can get a subscription to that they keep sending you toilet paper. And these will hopefully not have plastic packaging around them. And I'll link a few companies you can check out below. Lotion and body butters can be great options for moisturizers that aren't in plastic jars. So you can find lotion bars, and body butters comes in a glass jar that you can hopefully bring back to the company that you buy it from if you buy locally, or you can reuse the glass jar or recycle. The lotion bars you can buy from Mountain Madness soap as well, and I'll link that below. And they're kind of cool to have a bar instead of the plastic container. Cotton swabs definitely need an alternative as we flush so many down the toilet. And we talked about before, you shouldn't do that. But now they're making some cotton swabs with the bamboo, and these are becoming a bit more popular as people request non-plastic options. So this will biodegrade. But be careful, as doctors recommend, you don't use them to clean your ears. So if you're not using them to clean your keyboard or whatever it is people are actually supposed to use those things for, then you may be injuring your ears. There's even plastic-free toilet brushes by Boobaloo. I'll link it down below. So for your toilet brushing enthusiast, a great Christmas or birthday present, of course. We do have some fairly eco-friendly shaving options as well. You could get a metal reusable razor that you just load up with razor blades, an electric shaver that you can use over and over again, a straight edge razor. Be careful with those, though. I honestly wouldn't recommend them unless you know what you're doing. Those are the ones that barbers use if you go to a good barber. Shaving soaps can be used instead of shaving creams, and I'll link some from Mountain Madness soap down below. And these can be like I say, a replacement that's not going to come in a can. So a lot of shaving creams come in a metal bottle, but it's going to also have a plastic lid on top. So be wary of that. So for an alternative to loofahs, you can just get an actual loofah. You can grow one, or you can purchase one. It's sort of like a cucumber type thing, but they work great. And I'll link some down below that you could purchase, or you can look online how to get some to grow yourself. Next, we have some toys for your kids. So if you buy used, that's the first option. Obviously, you're going to get plastic lots of times, but at least, again, you're not adding more plastic to the world. You're just using plastic that already exists. Make sure you wash and clean off the toy first. Another option is to make toys from scratch yourself. In the Zero Waste Home, the author recommends doing things like making Play-Doh yourself, which you can look up recipes for. This makes part of the fun is making the thing, and the second bit of the fun is actually playing with it. So this is a good idea in my opinion. Or you can look there's some eco-friendly toys often made of wood and things, kind of harkening back to the old days, Lincoln Logs and things, that can be quite fun for your kids. Now we even have some alternatives for pencils. There's a new pencil, they're called Sprout World pencils, and they have a seed in the rear of them instead of an eraser, so you'd have to buy a separate eraser, but that's okay because you can go all the way through it, and that works out pretty well. But you can actually plant the end of the pencil and grow a vegetable from it. They have different types of seeds in each pencil. Another option is there's recycled newspaper pencils you can check out as well, and I'll try to link some down below. Options for pens. Check out inkless pens, which are new to me. I hadn't heard of, so they obviously operate through some sort of magic. And then, or you can buy recycled pens or fountain pens where you buy your own ink in some sort of bulk, so you use less plastic that way. Next, we have the infamous straw, which we hear a lot of controversy about because it does get stuck in like you saw that video of a straw getting stuck in a sea turtle's nose and injuring it pretty badly. It was quite sad to watch. Some options and alternatives for straws are silicone straws. They still use fossil fuels and they're not great. I would be fairly skeptical of these, but you can use them over and over again. They do use plastic though. Metal straws are an option, but they are hard to clean. So make sure you really clean it out, because if you don't wash the inside, it bacteria can form in there and create sickness for you. There's fruit straws now. In the video Chefs versus Normals, you can watch on YouTube. They talk about avocado and apple straws, which sounds pretty interesting. I linked some avocado straws down below. I had a harder time finding apple straws, so you'll have to find those yourself. Now, some people do say, we need plastic straws for people that are disabled, because they need to be able to eat through straws or consume their food there. And I think, honestly, if we just have the people that need to use straws, they cannot survive without straws, use plastic straws until we come up with a better alternative, then the world's going to be a lot less full of plastic straws, let's be honest. So I don't think we need to worry about them not using it. It's the average everyday person that should be cutting down on their straw use. Garbage bag alternatives, you can try composting, as we talked about before. Set up a compost. All your wets and food items can go in the compost, provided they're biodegradable, which all your foods should be. Just make sure you get them out of the packaging and all that. This will allow you to just throw away various items that will allow you to not use a garbage bag. If you don't have the wet items, the food items, then often you can just throw away wrappers and things into the garbage bin itself, and then take that garbage bin out to your garbage can that will then be picked up by the city. This will allow you to cut down on the garbage bags. If you live in rural areas where you have to bring your garbage to a dumpster, you can find biodegradable solutions, though they're not great, and they sometimes biodegrade before you get to them. So just try your best with those and see what other solutions you can come up with. There is some alternatives as well for utensils, wood and metal. Obviously, most of what you use is metal. And bamboo is another alternative that we see popping up a lot. Don't get plastic versions for barbecues and things like that. Just use normal ones. You can wash them later. Cloth instead of paper napkins, and in the video Chefs versus Normals, you can see they review some plastic alternatives to utensils, and some are called vegware, and I believe they're compostable. It's worth looking into as well. Moving on to clothes, you have options such as hemp, cotton, leather, wool, and silk. I don't recommend the latter three, as they are fairly unethical the way they go about getting these substances from animals. So be wary of that. Now, hemp and cotton are two popular options. If you're going to try to get any of the options of the leather, wool, and silk, try to get them used so that an animal doesn't have to suffer specifically for your item. It's already taken place, which is bad enough, but at least then there's not another one that has to. They don't have to replace the item and do that again. Now, some companies are trying to make plastics and shoes with the reused plastic, though they seem to be better than new plastic. This often can be done, it can't be done over and over, so it's not a perfect solution, unfortunately. We also see some companies looking to lower the plastic percentage in their clothes, such as Patagonia. They're trying to reduce plastic in theirs. So according to Friends of the Earth, I'll link this article down below, some things you can do to reduce your plastic are use or wash at low temperatures. Put your washing in a guppy bag or Cora ball, both of which I will link down below. Fill the washing machine as much as possible to reduce friction of clothes. Reduce spin speeds. Use fabric softener. Air dry rather than tumble dry. Use a front load washing machine. Buy less fleece, since fleece is one of the worst as far as microplastics goes. And keep your clothing longer, since they shed the most the first few washes. If you can, try and buy a washer with a microfiber filter, since they do make those as well. So plastic gloves that you might use as a chef, even potentially eventually in the medical industry. There's some options right now that are compostable, such as vegware, though these aren't great and they often don't fit too well. So maybe for food you could use them, but obviously not for medical use yet. But perhaps someday we'll have an alternative. All right, so now we're on to beverages. For beverages, first of all, for water, just get a reusable water bottle. They make a lot of them out of metals and things like that that you can use over and over again, and these are good options. For coffee, back in the day, people used to go to diners, just drink out of a cup, and is much more laid back. Read your paper, socialize a little bit, drink your coffee, and then go to work. I honestly think this is kind of a nice alternative, and just harkens back to another time. They moved a lot slower than we do today. You can also do this at a coffee shop. Try to find a coffee shop where you can get a cup instead of a plastic container, or go to a drive-through coffee place and see if they have those cups that you can use over and over again. You bring them back each time, and they fill it up for a certain amount of money. As far as your home coffee use, try using compostable or reusable coffee filters, or get your own press. For tea, get loose leaf tea over tea bags, because tea bags can leach plastic. And then for alcohol, they often come with those little 6-pack holders, some of them, or they come in the little cardboard things, which is fine. If you're getting bottles or cans, this is fine for the most part. But you can also get growlers that you can refill at your local brewery if you want to support local. So what about diapers? Unfortunately, I didn't find anything that was a perfect solution to this by any means, but there are reusable diapers, and I'll link some down below that people have high reviews of. That is probably the most sustainable alternative. They do make sustainable material diapers, though they're not perfect, and they often do have some plastic in them, but I'll try to link some of those as well. Now, on to the next section, which is what are other things you can do to make a difference? First of all, try to buy local as much as possible. I keep talking about this a little bit, but buying local, like breads and fruits and vegetables, beers, wines, all that, gives you the option of generally choosing your container possibly, and just supporting your neighbors as well. And it reduces the shipping packaging that you're going to use, and the general packaging as well, because it's going to be a lot fresher. So this can be a little bit more pricey, but it does help your neighbors out and your town out more than buying across the country or across the world. The next one we've already talked about, which is buy in bulk using eco-friendly containers. We didn't really talk about the bulk, but the eco-friendly containers. Make sure you buy in large quantities so you can use the least amount of packaging. And as long as it's going to last, you don't want to be throwing away food. But if it's something like nuts or something that you can store for a while, I recommend buying in bulk as much as possible. Adding on to the buying in bulk, it also allows you to cook from scratch, often providing cheaper options because you get more for your money. And this will also, like as I say, reduce packaging because you're buying in larger quantities, and then you can cook from scratch, so you don't end up getting all these extra utensils thrown in fast food bags or any of that you have to worry about the plastic from. Next, we have make strict lists before you go shopping. This will stop you from impulse buying, which will often be things packaged like sweets and things that will be packaged in certainly plastic containers. So make sure you have a strict list and you only buy from that. Be cognizant of what you do with your waste. For example, things like floss and 6-pack drink holders can cause damage to animals, getting wrapped around turtles or various creatures. So make sure you cut these things before you throw them out, as that will reduce the chance that they will be wrapped around something and choke it. Now it's still going to break into pieces and things could choke on it, and it still has all the problems that plastic had before, but it gets rid of at least one specific problem. Do a waste audit is the next one, which is kind of an interesting idea. Essentially what you should do is keep a pen and pad on your fridge or on your counter near your trash can, and every time you or anyone in your family throws something away, write down what it is. This will allow you to see the stuff you're throwing away and how wasteful you're being, because you can see how much food you're throwing away or any of that stuff. As well as the stuff that you're just generally not using that's getting thrown away. And it'll allow you to make smarter purchasing options and therefore reducing more packaging that way. And it'll also save you money in the long run. So just do it for 1 month where you write down everything you're throwing away, and you'll be surprised at how much you can stop from purchasing and save. Start a tool co-op or a tool library. I certainly understand not wanting everyone to use your prized possessions. For instance, my guitars that are behind me are some of my prized possessions. I don't want just anybody off the street to come in and play them. But there's often tools and things that you have that you only use, very rarely. Maybe it's mowers or hammers or anything really, that you want to share with your neighbors and stuff, or purchase together with your neighbors. And this that way all of you can use it. And this is kind of an interesting idea. So just go ahead with your neighbors and start a tool co-op or tool library that everyone has access to. The next idea is to get repair kits for items, so just things like a sewing kit, for instance, where you can repair clothes and blankets and things like that when they break. This will allow you to buy less plastic replacements. Next, we have grow your own. If you grow various things in your garden or planter boxes or indoor herb gardens, things like that, it saves you money and will stop much of the packaging needed to move these items around or get from your store. But what if you don't have room for a garden at your house? Try looking up a community garden. Sometimes you may already have one, or you can check with neighbors and start one as well. This basically allows you to, everybody puts in some amount of work to the garden, and then everybody gets a little bit of food out, which is a great way to work together as well as get some natural food and not have to use extra packaging. Next, we have start a local buying club. This is when you and your friends / neighbors or any other group of people buy products together in bulk in order to save on shipping, packaging costs, etc. And you all share on the purchase. This again, you buy in bulk, you use less packaging generally. Next, we already talked about a tool co-op, but what about a food co-op? A food co-op, according to tasteofhome.com, is essentially a grocery store that's owned by the people who shop there. Members get to decide what foods and products are stocked on the shelves, where those items are purchased, and what quality standards both products and vendors have to meet. This allows you to have more control over what containers are used for food products. And you can look up different websites. I think grocer.coop/co-ops, I'll link down below, is one way to look up co-ops near you. Community-supported agriculture is another option. This is when you support local farms, often through some sort of subscription service, and you receive food in return, thus reducing the packaging necessary for these food items because they aren't shipped long distances and stored. Next, we have forage. You can find a lot of natural foods not far from home. Be sure to do a fair bit of research first, though. There's many poisonous mushrooms, for example, that look fairly similar to edible ones. I'll link down below kind of a guide to foraging. As I say, be careful, but you can often find natural and yummy foods that won't need any plastic packaging. Thrift shops are another great option. You can buy things like Tupperware from thrift shops as much as possible because you're, again, buying plastic. It's not producing more plastic into the world. It's just plastic that already exists. So again, it's not perfect, but it does work pretty well. And then also donate your own plastic items to the thrift stores if they're in good shape, so that others can use them so they don't go to waste. Join a waste committee. That's a place in your town where you discuss waste management procedures, where you can push for better recycling options and things like that. Start an EPR program. This is extended producer responsibility, where EPR uses financial incentives to encourage manufacturers to design environmentally friendly products by holding producers responsible for the cost of managing their products at the end of the life, not just when they get to the consumer. Another idea is that you can start campaigns. Essentially what you do is like what Natalie Fee did, where her and a bunch of friends bombarded feminine product companies on social media about how they needed to make non-plastic alternatives so women could still use their products and still be eco-friendly. So that's something that can work, and change can happen through that if you go about it in the right way. Next, we have encourage local businesses to reduce plastic. If you don't want to do the campaigns on social media for bigger companies, just go to your local businesses and talk to them and suggest ideas. And you'd be surprised how often local businesses are willing to help, because so many people do genuinely care about the plastic crisis we have going for us now. Talk to city officials about putting in more clean water stations, where you can fill up your water bottle, since often water fountains aren't the best option since people drink from them and they're often not that hygienic. Some cities and states are even putting in legislation to help with the plastic crisis. Places like California and Seattle are. It has reduced plastic use quite a bit, but it's certainly not perfect, because then you have to use more alternatives like cotton bags, which use more fossil fuels. Though I think it is a good step in the right direction, or at least it can be. You just have to make sure that we are eventually coming up with an alternative to this. So, and I think these kind of legislations can often spur these companies to actually make changes and spur new people to come up with alternatives to plastic. And that's our video. I know this was kind of a long first video. It certainly was for me. You probably can hear me getting more tired throughout the video. Again, I want to recommend the Zero Waste Home to you, again, because a lot of, especially at the end, a lot of what I was citing there was from her book, and How to Give Up Plastic by Will McCallum as well. And this video really has taught me a lot as I was doing the research for it, and I hope you've learned a lot too. I'm just sort of beginning my journey into a more sustainable lifestyle, since I'm just starting to learn about really the harm that can be done by just not paying attention at all. But I think we really can make some changes. As individuals, our purchasing power does influence corporations, though they are going to have to do a lot of changes themselves, and I know they're going to want to fight it because it certainly will cut into their profit margins and things. But we need governments, corporations, and ourselves to make big changes in order to end the suffering of animals from our waste, and the suffering of ourselves and people, particularly in poorer countries, who are suffering the most. But anyway, thank you for watching, and tune in to more videos coming soon where we talk about various different topics, and I will hopefully teach you some things, and you all can teach me some things as well. Thank you.